Hey everyone, welcome. The most important symbol ever made. Classically known as the Taijitsu and modernly known as the Yin Yang. This is the ultimate integral truth. Compressed. Describing the ineffable as closely as possible in one symbol. Representing both the monism, the non-duality, as well as the dualism, the dualistic concession, the descriptor, the concepts trying to describe the non-dual, the ineffable. This is true simultaneity. Monism and dualism in one symbol. A really good way to understand this most important symbol ever made is to take ourselves back to 1,000 years ago with Zhou Dunyi, with across the perennial wisdoms across the planet. There was the formulation of these styles of symbols. One circle for the whole, for the non-dual, for the monism, and inside of it the explanation of the dualism, in that flux, the forces at play. And why was it made this way? To think about that. If you had to try and compress the nature of reality into one symbol that could simultaneously represent monism, non-duality, as well as dualism, and try and put the ineffable into a symbol simultaneously with these profound truths, the most ultimate integral truth, trying to represent that with a symbol, it makes sense that you would have that circle representing the whole, or the non-dual, or the monist, the circle, and then inside of it, the most succinct way you might start with, well, what if we put one line through the middle and we represent one side as good and one side as bad, or light and dark, or what have you, light and day, all these types of dualisms, male, female, etc. But the line down the middle doesn't explain how the two forces interplay, how they're interdependent, how it's like Leela, the divine cosmic play. And so that's why, as you see here in the Taijitsu on that left side, you can see how the drawing of it is the two interplay, they interweave, they're drawn in a perfect way where you can see that there's, from the 2D, it looks like they are interplaying in a 3D. And this older version of it on the left also has the eyes there of each fish that are swimming around one another, that those eyes are also in the interplay and interweaving process, whereas in the modern conception, it's almost as though it's lost the salience of, in the sense of chasing after the tails of one another, with the eye in each, is a lot different than what was in the OG days, where you had what appeared to be them both meeting at the center point. Them meeting at the center point and having those eyes, they're pointed at the center point. It's just that center point is the flux. It is the ascension process. And this is sort of a modern interpretation as well, where we've included this in our projects, where you take that yin and yang and you add some of the cutting edge scientific concepts into it. You add the James Clerk Maxwell's electromagnetic flux. When you add the electromagnetism and you add the solenoid, the helical ascension, when you add the not theoretic dynamics as well, you sort of begin synthesizing science and spirituality in a way that makes sense. And we unpack this a lot in the Exegesis of the Universal One by Walter Russell, where he also went into great depth at explaining the electromagnetic, the generoradiative, right? And they all, in his understanding as well, were just like that OG symbol where they meet in that middle point, and that's where the ascension process happens across all of it. The modern interpretation seems to have, in a sense, lost part of the dynamic that the old one had, where it looked as though it was more of a three-dimensional style ascension and not so much just chasing the tail. And that last part at the bottom is the symphonic aspect to it, where it is just one monism, non-duality, yet at the same time, the dualistic concession is that these are different gems around our necks that the source light is shining through. And so as our iris is a unique expression, a unique coloration, the pupil is what is shared as that eye of God, of source, of the infinite, of the Tao, of Brahman. And so in this case, it's important to remember that the instruments or the gems in the symphony are saxophones and trumpets and clarinets and violins and violas and cellos and xylophones, and they're different harmonics that are being played, different melodies are being played, and people will have solos at different times as well. And there's an attractor in this entire process. That's why you have like the conductor of that symphony here in the visual is an attractor, because the complex system of what this is evolving towards something. And that is very much like the cyclicity. It's very much like the Ouroboros. It's very much like a recursive functionality. The dream, the illusion, the appearance, what this is, calls on itself more of this. And it can be thought of like Leela, that divine cosmic play. There's more play. That source God, the infinite, the absolute, the formless, there is a process of the form, the physical, the dream, the illusion, the appearance to be explored in more and more depth, in more and more play, in more and more dancing, more and more art, more and more irises. And so when you begin adding some of these scientific concepts into the spiritual, like the knot theory, the solenoid, the electromagnetic flux, when you add the analogy of things like the symphony and the strange attractor and things like that, to the spiritual taijitsu, what happens is that you're able to understand the unity of the symbol. The symbol itself is the unification of the spirit and the science into one. And so this is by far, from my understanding, the most optimal way for us to understand the ineffable in a single symbol. The ineffable in a single symbol. And to sort of go back 1,000 years across these cultures around the planet and to think about what it was like back then, trying to put the ineffable in one symbol, because that's what it was like. It's like, okay, it's one, got it, so there's the circle, and then it's also dual with the flux. And so instead of putting the line drawn right in the middle, we're going to angle the line like this. We're going to have the two heads of each of the fish, like in the old school version, they meet in that middle point, and it looks like in 3 dimensions that they ascend together, and the eyes of each of the fish point towards the middle as well, whereas that style of thinking appears to be lost in the new modern interpretation of the yin-yang symbol. As though the old symbol almost has more depth to the concept. It has more depth to the understanding. And so this is a very important idea for us moving forward, is to illustrate these most important symbols ever made into even greater visuals, into even greater videos and film. And that's what was made with movies like Star Wars, is that you have the dualistic flux that is in ascension, the light and the dark. And yet there's not enough yet people that are illustrating through art the simultaneity of monism and dualism. There's no lack. It's a non-dual enigma that's perfect and whole already and complete, and expressing itself as this appearance. Yet at the same time, in the dualistic concession of the mountain, where you want more and more prosperity, where we want more and more well-being and less suffering, suffering's acting as the drill sergeant, right? That's where you have the cute little eye, which is like the white eye in the black fish, right? The black fish is like suffering, but the white eye in the black fish is that suffering is what births, shadow births fire, right? Where the suffering acts as a drill sergeant for awakening. And so in this mountain analogy, we actually, which is the dualistic concession, where there is something to seek, there is something to become enlightened about, to reach some sort of absolute, to pierce this veilless veil or this gateless gate, we need to illustrate this symbol in more depth across our art, across our film, across our visuals and videos, creating more and more true simultaneity between monism and dualism, which is ultimately why the yin-yang symbol, why this taijutsu is so beautiful, why it's so important, why it's known as the most important symbol that's ever been made. That is true simultaneity in one symbol. True simultaneity in one symbol is right here. It's right under our noses. And it's been here for over 1,000 years across the different planetary cultures. Their mystic traditions have produced symbols that are so similar to each other that look just like this, with a monism that has a dualism that is acting as some sort of an ascension style flux, a dynamic interplay between polar opposites, which is exactly what's seen in the James Clerk Maxwell electromagnetism, or the helical solenoid, or in how in knot theory everything is interconnected and intertwined and interdependent on one another as well. And take ourselves back in time to 1,000 years ago, thinking about how we could try and illustrate in just one symbol the ineffable. And that's what this is. That's why it's the ultimate integral truth. Putting the ineffable into a single symbol, as close as we can get. That's what this is. That's what the taijutsu and the yin-yang, that's what this is explaining. The true simultaneity between the monism and the dualism in a flux ascension. And you can add that Ouroboros aspect to it as well, where the snake eats its tail and the cyclicity continues eternally, which is what has been happening and is what will continue happening. That's what this is. That's what we are. And we've talked about it like consciousness or awareness that is eternally being colored by experience. Although in the appearance or the dream or the illusion, we recognize that at the same time there is no agent, there is no attributes. We recognize that non-dual wisdom, yet we also recognize the dual wisdom of there being a mountain and recognizing that consciousness is being colored by experience is a pretty high point up the mountain versus being an egoic, contracted, separate entity that has yet to dissolve as a sugar cube into the hot tea of infinity. So we recognize and we're able to hold this true simultaneity. And that's this ultimate lesson, this ultimate integral truth, the monism and the dualism in one symbol, the ineffable in one symbol, as close as we can get. And seeing how the old school version of it actually has that profound additional component to it where the two poles are actually meeting harmonically in that middle point that is an ascension, and the two eyes are also pointing upward as well in that three-dimensional ascension that seems in the 2D version to somewhat be lost. And to also add the scientific components as well in order to try and better explain a synthesis between the two as we go deeper in the ineffable to synthesize what the modern day science and materialists, which is ultimately, as quantum mechanics is proving, just energy, it's all no thing, yet that physicalism interplays with the spirituality so perfectly, as well as the symphonic component of the oneness, as well as the unique diamond necklace that is around each of our necks that's refracting the source light in a unique way, like our iris is colored, that's our unique instrument that is being played towards this strange attractor, which is that Godhead in the Ouroboros. And so all of these symbols across these cultures over time are trying to get us to recognize the true simultaneity of monism and dualism. In one symbol, put the ineffable into our psyche, just stamping it. Boom, there it is. And now it's up to us in modernity to use film, to use visuals, to use art, to take this to the next level. And this is a big part of what we're doing right now with our visuals and projects, is taking this type of ultimate integral truth to the next level. So it's not this or that, but it's this and that. So it's not that the left politically is right and the right is wrong, or the right is right and the left is wrong. It's that there's a sorting algorithm that happens where the best codes from each are uplifted and they're merged together into one. And that same thing is true about indigeneity and modernity, or about Hollywood and Silicon Valley, or about, quote, physicalism and consciousness. You know, there's all of these different science, spirituality. There's all these different USA, China. There's all these different ways to portray the two, that the dirty bathwater gets drained, the old codes get archived, while the beautiful babies come out and get merged into one. So that's the sorting algorithm of the codes. And that's very true again in that simultaneity. It's all about simultaneity. Simultaneously, the monism and the dualism, the non-duality and this flux ascension that is happening. The mountain being so important at the same time as being an illusion. That the mountain is that suffering as a drill sergeant that is creating the seeking impulse to enlighten and to become union, yoga, mysticism, henosis, become one with the absolute, become one with God, become one with your source, one with infinity. To recognize that unique gem, that diamond necklace that is already around your neck, refracting that source light. To stop seeking externally for happiness found in objects or the worldly pleasures, but to turn inward and recognize that my consciousness is what I am seeking. My awareness is it. This is the awareness of God that is shared across all of us. It's the awareness of our source, awareness of the infinitude, the eternity, the Tao, the Brahman. And to have respect for things like this, because in modernity it seems to be quite lost, the idea that in one symbol we can put an ultimate integral truth that simultaneously holds the monism and the dualism. That's all. I hope this was valuable, and if so, like the video, subscribe if you haven't. Also, leave a comment below. Would love to hear from you about this. Definitely take the idea of the most important symbol ever made and recognize the true simultaneity of it, and then add art, add visual components, add film components to this to disseminate it even more fruitfully across the world and to catalyze that awakening to the true nature of who we are and why we're here, and Leela, the divine play, the cosmic play. I love you very much. Thank you for tuning in, and share the video also with people that'll find it valuable. We'll see you soon. Infinite love. Peace.